She was on the worst blind date of her life with a guy who hadn't asked her one question in 43 minutes, until the man at the next table looked straight at her and said in Korean, "If you're free, sit here." She turned and realized he was the most powerful CEO in Asia. He changed her life forever. Drop a like right now if you're already obsessed, and comment SIT here if you would have left that date in 0.2 seconds. Let's get this video to 1 million likes today. The napkin at Elysee was linen, not cotton, the type that costs more to launder than my first car payment. I folded it precisely on my lap while calculating exactly how many billable hours I'd wasted on this date. 3 years at Stanford Law, graduating top of my class, landing at Bergman Holcomb and Reed, and somehow I still let my mother convince me that meeting a nice man should rank above making partner before 35 on my priority list. Trevor adjusted his Patek Philippe watch for the third time since sitting down. He wanted me to notice it, to be impressed by it, the way people who define themselves by possessions always do. The soft lighting caught the sapphire crystal as he gestured, explaining cryptocurrency to me as if I hadn't written my thesis on blockchain intellectual property rights. "The problem with women in tech," he said, swirling his 20-year scotch like it was a personality trait, "is that they don't understand the fundamental architecture of disruption." I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. My molars ground together as I maintained the smile that never reached my eyes. The smile I'd perfected in boardrooms full of men who assumed my research binder contained coffee orders. The professional mask that had become a second skin since the day Professor Harmon had told me, "Asian women make excellent associates, Mina. Partners, though? That's a different story." Trevor hadn't asked me a single question in 43 minutes. Not one. He'd looked at his phone 17 times. I'd counted each glance, each dismissive flick of his eyes, cataloging them like evidence in a case I was building against my own judgment. "Did you know," I said, voice neutral despite the fire in my chest, "that the Hodgkin-Huxley model of neural transmission was developed in 1952? It describes how signals deteriorate when they travel only in one direction." His eyes glazed over. He hadn't understood the insult, which somehow made it worse. The restaurant buzzed around us. San Francisco tech money mixed with old finance. White tablecloths, crystal glasses that rang like tiny bells when touched, servers who appeared and disappeared with the precision of stage magic. Through the ambient noise, I heard a few words in Korean from the next table. Familiar consonants that reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen in Queens, where she taught me the language my parents had been too busy assimilating to maintain. Trevor's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then stood. "Need to take this. Potential investor. Back in 5. He didn't wait for my response. I watched him walk away, his Italian leather shoes clicking against marble, and contemplated the physics of how quickly I could exit through the kitchen without being noticed. I'd calculated my tip already, 50%, because the server didn't deserve to suffer for my poor choices. That's when I heard it again. Korean, softer this time, directed at me. "If you're free, sit here." I turned. The man at the next table sat alone, angled toward me with an expression I couldn't immediately categorize. Not pity, I would have left instantly. Not the predatory interest I'd grown accustomed to deflecting. Something more precise, evaluative. He wore a charcoal suit that had been tailored to his frame with mathematical exactness. No ostentatious watch, no signet ring, just a simple pair of titanium cufflinks that caught the light when he gestured to the empty chair across from him. I recognized him instantly and felt my throat constrict. Junho Kong, CEO of KST Global, the company whose revolutionary quantum encryption technology had been featured in the industry journal where my analysis of their patent portfolio had been published last month. My heart accelerated as if I'd mainlined espresso. This wasn't a line. This wasn't a rescue. This was professional recognition from someone whose technological innovations I'd studied obsessively. And he'd spoken to me in Korean, not assuming I wouldn't understand based on my Americanized appearance. I stood, decision already made, dignity suddenly irrelevant compared to opportunity. Trevor could find his own way home. If you've ever escaped a terrible date, you understand the pure adrenaline rush of liberation. Like this moment if you're already rooting for me to choose my worth over politeness. Subscribe if you want to see what happens when a woman stops making herself smaller to make mediocre men comfortable. Up close, Junho Kang's eyes were sharper than they appeared in press photos. Not cruel, focused. Present in a way that made me realize how absent everyone else had been. He pushed a leather portfolio across the table, opened to a document marked with the red, confidential stamp I recognized from litigation prep. I read your analysis, he said, voice low and measured. You understand our technology better than our own legal team. The validation hit like a drug, flooding warmth through my chest. 3 years of 80-hour weeks of being overlooked in meetings, of male partners taking credit for my research memos, and here was acknowledgement from someone who actually mattered in my field. I didn't realize how starved I'd been for recognition until it appeared on a silver platter. Thomas Wayland filed this morning, he continued, tapping the document, claims our encryption method infringes on his 2019 patent. I scanned the first page, my brain shifting into the analytical framework that felt more natural than small talk ever had. Wayland Technologies, the industry vampire, the patent troll who'd built his fortune by crushing startups with spurious litigation. This is garbage, I said, forgetting to modulate my tone, forgetting where I was. His patent describes a completely different application. The underlying architecture of your encryption model uses quantum entanglement principles his system can't even approach. Junho's expression didn't change, but something in his posture eased fractionally. That's exactly what I thought. But Wayland has 3 federal judges in his golf club and a legal team that's never lost a patent case. The implication hung in the air between us. David versus Goliath, except Goliath had an army of Harvard-educated attorneys and unlimited resources. My fingers tightened on the portfolio edge. The challenge crystallized in my mind like a perfect geometric proof. You need someone who understands both the technology and the legal vulnerabilities, I said, not a question. Someone outside Wayland's sphere of influence. I need you, Junho confirmed, no flattery in his tone, just clear-eyed assessment. I should have hesitated, should have mentioned conflicts of interest, firm approvals, the proper channels. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my first year of law school. Pure, unfiltered excitement. The chance to do work that actually mattered instead of helping tech bros patent slightly different versions of society's destruction. My rate is $950 an hour, I said, watching his face for the flinch that never came. I'll double it, he replied without blinking. If you can start tonight. I should have been insulted by the presumption that I could be bought. Instead, I felt a strange relief. No pretense. No social niceties. Just the clean, honest transaction of expertise for compensation. The server appeared with a glass of water I hadn't ordered. Junho thanked him in a way that acknowledged the man's humanity, the small courtesy revealing more character than Trevor's hour of self-aggrandizement. Your date won't be happy, Junho observed, glancing toward the restrooms where Trevor had disappeared. He's not my date anymore, I said, the decision crystallizing as the words left my mouth. He's just a man who's about to discover what it feels like to be ghosted. Junho's private office made the firm's corner offices look like cubicles. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the San Francisco skyline, lights punctuating the darkness like terrestrial stars. The space felt functional rather than ostentatious. Technology seamlessly integrated into surfaces that appeared minimalist until you realized every element served multiple purposes. I'd left my heels by the door, a small liberty that felt strangely intimate, and stood barefoot on the heated concrete floor, surrounded by holographic displays of KST's patent documentation. Wayland's claim hinges on this sequence, I said, manipulating the display to highlight a section of code. He's arguing that your encryption method follows the same process flow as his 2019 patent. Junho stood beside me, close enough that I could smell the subtle notes of his cologne. Sandalwood and something sharper I couldn't identify. Not overwhelming like Trevor's creed that had announced his presence before he'd even arrived at the table. It doesn't, Junho said, certainty in his voice. Our method uses quantum key distribution principles that weren't even theoretically possible when Wayland filed. I know, I replied, frustration leaking into my tone. But Wayland's attorneys have deliberately obscured the technical language to make the processes appear similar to a judge with no background in quantum computing. They've bastardized the terminology to create false equivalencies. Anger flared hot and sharp behind my sternum. This was everything I hated about patent law. The way innovation could be strangled by those with the deepest pockets and the most shameless legal teams. The way brilliance could be crushed by bureaucracy and greed. They're counting on complexity, I continued, the words flowing faster now, fueled by genuine outrage. They're betting that no judge will understand the fundamental differences between post-quantum cryptography and true quantum encryption. That everyone will get lost in the technical jargon and default to Wayland's established industry position. Junho watched me, not interrupting my flow of analysis. Not trying to reclaim the intellectual high ground the way male colleagues inevitably did. Just observing with that same focused attention that made me feel simultaneously exposed and validated. Then we need to make it simple, he said when I finally paused for breath. We need to translate the technical differences into language any judge can understand. It's not that easy, I snapped, then immediately regretted my tone. Sorry, I didn't mean. No, he interrupted the first time he'd done so. You're right. It's not easy. If it were easy, I wouldn't need you. The acknowledgement disarmed me completely. I'd spent so many years being told to soften my edges, to phrase my insights as questions, to make men feel comfortable with my intelligence. And here was someone explicitly valuing my sharpest parts. My throat tightened with an emotion I refused to name. I need fuel, I said instead, and not whatever green juice Silicon Valley executives usually subsist on. Junho's smile transformed his face, lines appearing around his eyes that weren't visible in any of his press photos. Human lines. Real ones. How do you feel about Korean fried chicken at 2 a.m.? He asked. For the first time that night, I smiled without calculation. The stakes are getting higher. Like if you think I should start my own firm, comment your theories on Wayland's next move, and subscribe for the courtroom showdown coming up. I woke with a jolt, disoriented by the unfamiliar angle of light across my face. Not my apartment, not a hotel. The leather couch in Junho's office, a cashmere throw draped over me that I didn't remember acquiring. My shoes placed neatly beside the coffee table. My jacket folded over the arm of the couch. The wall of windows revealed a city transitioning from night to morning, fog clinging to the tops of buildings like reluctant dreams. On the table, my legal pad contained 17 pages of notes in my precise handwriting. Beside it, a takeout container from Honey Night with a single piece of chicken remaining. Memories of the previous night assembled themselves in chronological order. The progressive dismantling of Wayland's claim. Junho's unexpected knowledge of case law. The way he'd actually listened, when I explained the subtle distinctions between different encryption methodologies. The moment our hands had both reached for the same document. His fingers brushing mine with a static electricity that had nothing to do with the dry office air. I checked my phone. 23 missed calls. 15 from Trevor, increasingly irate. 8 from my firm's managing partner, Victor Bergman. The last one had come in at 3:27 a.m., followed by a text that made my stomach drop through the floor. Mina, calling an emergency meeting at 8 a.m. Wayland Technologies is our second largest client. What the hell are you doing with Junho Kong? Call me immediately. Asterisk. The fear hit like ice water. Not just for my career, though that registered with sharp clarity, but for the integrity of everything I'd been building with Junho. If Wayland was Bergman Holcomb's client, everything I'd done in the past 12 hours constituted a massive ethical breach. The kind that ended careers. The kind that led to disbarment. The office door opened. Junho entered carrying 2 cups from St. Frank Coffee. His suit as pristine as if he hadn't spent the night poring over technical documents. He changed, I realized. Had he gone home while I slept? The thought sent an illogical pang through my chest. You have a conflict? I said without preamble, holding up my phone. Bergman represents Wayland. Junho set the coffee on the table, his expression unchanging. I know. The words landed like a physical blow. You knew? And you still asked me to. I knew as of 2 hours ago, he clarified, his tone carefully neutral. My team ran a conflicts check overnight. Wayland became Bergman's client 3 weeks ago, specifically to create this exact situation. I stood, blood rushing to my head too quickly, making the room tilt. That's impossible. Conflict checks take days normally, but not when the managing partner expedites them. Not when there's enough money involved. Junho's voice remained level, but I could see tension in the set of his shoulders. Wayland didn't just file against KST yesterday. He orchestrated this entire situation to cut us off from legal representation. The strategic brilliance hit me with sick clarity. By retaining Bergman Holcomb, Wayland had effectively neutralized the firm with the strongest technology patent litigation team in San Francisco. He'd created a conflict of interest that prevented them from representing KST, and now had ammunition to claim ethical violations if I continued working with Junho. I need to call Victor, I said, reaching for my phone with fingers that felt numb. I need to explain. That you spent the night working for his firm's opponent? Junho finished, not unkindly. That you reviewed confidential documents without a formal engagement letter? That you violated half a dozen professional ethics rules in the past 12 hours. Each word drove the knife deeper. I'd been so caught up in the intellectual challenge, so flattered by the recognition, that I'd failed to perform the most basic professional diligence. Had failed to protect myself against exactly the kind of predatory tactics I prided myself on anticipating. I've destroyed my career, I whispered, the reality crashing down with crushing weight. Junho sat on the edge of the coffee table, entering my space without touching me. Only if you let them define what your career is. I laughed, the sound raw and bitter. Easy for you to say. You're a billionaire CEO. I'm 3 years into paying off $300,000 in student loans. I don't have the luxury of principles. Don't you? He countered, pushing the coffee toward me like a peace offering. Isn't that why you became a lawyer? To defend principles. The question struck with uncomfortable precision. I remembered the idealistic law school applicant I'd been, determined to protect innovation, to ensure that good ideas weren't crushed by corporate machinery. When had that person disappeared beneath billable hours and partnership aspirations? What choice do I have? I asked, hating the vulnerability in my voice. If I withdraw now and beg forgiveness, maybe Victor will. Let you keep your associate position? Protect you from Wayland's influence? For how long? Junho's eyes held mine, unrelenting but not unkind. You've seen their playbook now. You know how they operate. Do you really want to spend your career apologizing for excellence? The coffee steam curled between us, fragrant and accusatory. I'd spent my entire professional life following rules created by men who would break them the instant it served their purposes. Playing a game designed for me to lose, measuring success by how long I could delay the inevitable. What's the alternative? I asked, the question emerging more defeated than defiant. Junho reached into his jacket and extracted a business card. Heavy cardstock. Embossed lettering, no logo. Just a name and number. Park and Associates, he said, placing it on the table between us. Your own firm, starting with KST as your first client. I stared at the card as if it might burst into flame. That's insane. I can't just. Why not? You have the expertise. You have the reputation in the industry. All you lack is the belief that you deserve more than being someone else's associate. His words peeled back layers of professional armor I'd built so carefully, exposing the raw ambition beneath, the hunger I'd been taught to disguise, the dreams I'd learned to frame as distant possibilities rather than immediate demands. And if we lose against Wayland? I challenged, falling back on the risk assessment that had become my reflexive response to opportunity. If he crushes your company and destroys my reputation in the process. Junho didn't flinch. Then we lose fighting for something that matters. Isn't that better than winning for something you despise? The question hung between us, unanswerable in its simplicity. My phone buzzed again, Victor, calling for the 9th time. I silenced it without looking away from Junho's face. From the absolute certainty I found there that made my own doubts seem suddenly childish. I'll need office space, I said, the decision crystallizing as the words emerged. And a paralegal. And access to all of KST's technical documentation going back to inception. Junho's smile was subtle but transformative. Done. What else? The truth, I said, surprising myself with the demand. About why me? About why you were at that restaurant last night? About whether this is business or... I trailed off, unable to complete the question. Junho nodded once, accepting the implicit terms. I was meeting with investors who canceled last minute, he said, each word measured. I recognized you from your journal photograph. I observed your date's behavior and made a professional calculation that you deserved better intellectual company. And the personal component? I pressed, refusing to let him off the hook with half-truths. Junho hesitated for the first time since I'd met him. Is inadvisable given our professional relationship, but undeniable from my perspective. The admission, stripped of flowery language or manipulative charm, hit with unexpected force. Honesty without agenda. Attraction without expectation. I couldn't remember the last time a man had offered me either. We focus on the case first, I said, extending my hand formally across the space between us. Personal considerations remain secondary until resolution. Junho took my hand. His palm was warm against mine, the contact sending an electric current up my arm that I refused to acknowledge. Agreed. For the first time since law school, I felt something that had nothing to do with fear or ambition or careful calculation. Something dangerous and exhilarating. I felt free. The KST offices became my second home, then my first, as 18-hour days stretched into nights that blurred into mornings. I sublet my apartment, lived out of the executive suite Junho had provided, and surrendered to the all-consuming obsession of building an airtight defense against Wayland's attack. Victor's threats materialized as expected. Allegations of ethical violations, motions to disqualify, thinly veiled suggestions that my career in California was finished. Each legal obstacle required response, draining time and energy from the actual patent defense. Classic Wayland tactics. Death by 1,000 procedural cuts. My mother called daily, her disappointment transmitting clearly across fiber optic cables. You had stability, she repeated, the same argument that had driven her from Korea to America decades earlier. You had security. I had a cage, I replied, the words emerging with surprising vehemence. One that was getting smaller every day. She didn't understand. How could she? She'd sacrificed everything for predictability, for the assurance that her daughter would never face the economic uncertainty she'd known. The idea that I might voluntarily reject safety for principle was beyond her comprehension. Junho understood. He worked beside me without complaint, his brilliant mind complementing mine in ways that made our progress exponential rather than additive. When I faltered, drowning in Wayland's deliberately overcomplicated filings, he would place a cup of barley tea beside my keyboard without comment. When he struggled to explain technical concepts in layman's terms, I found analogies that bridged the gap between engineering precision and legal clarity. We developed a language of our own, half English, half Korean, interspersed with technical jargon and legal references that required no explanation between us. A private dialect that excluded everyone else, even the paralegal team that grew from 1 to 5 as the case expanded. I tried to maintain professional boundaries, to remember that Junho was my client, not my partner, that the electricity between us was a distraction we couldn't afford, that the way his hand sometimes lingered near mine when we reviewed documents together was a complication neither of us had time for. Most days I succeeded, until the night Wayland's latest motion arrived. A direct attack on my professional credibility, complete with affidavits from former colleagues attesting to my emotional instability and difficulty working with male superiors. Character assassination disguised as legal strategy. I read each word with growing nausea, recognizing the subtle sexism and racism woven through the statements. The way my thoroughness had been reframed as obsession. My attention to detail as neurosis. My unwillingness to accept mediocrity as inability to collaborate. When I reached the final page, a statement from Trevor describing me as unstable and vindictive after our date. Something inside me shattered. Not my resolve. My pretense that this was just business. That the personal wasn't political. That I could separate my identity from my work in a world determined to use the former to discredit the latter. I hurled my coffee mug against the wall with a violence that shocked even me. The ceramic exploded, dark liquid running down the white paint like blood from a wound. Junho found me like that. Standing amid the wreckage, hands trembling with a rage so pure it felt radioactive. He didn't speak, didn't try to soothe or dismiss, just crossed the room and stood before me, his presence an anchor in a storm of my own making. They win if you believe them, he said finally, voice low and certain. They win if you internalize their narrative. I know that, I snapped, hating the tears that threatened to fall, hating the weakness they represented. Intellectually, I know that. But emotionally? He pressed, stepping closer, crossing the invisible boundary we'd maintained for weeks. Emotionally, I want to burn their entire system to the ground. I admitted, the words tearing free from some primal place beneath my carefully constructed professional facade. I want them to feel what it's like to have everything they've built dismissed as emotional or hysterical or... Junho's hand settled on my shoulder, warm and steady. The contact silenced me more effectively than any words could have. His eyes held mine, unwavering. Then use that, he said, no judgment in his tone. Only understanding. Channel it into precision, into strategy. Show them exactly who you are by winning on your terms, not by playing their game. His faith in me, absolute and unshakable, broke something open that I'd kept sealed for years. The armor I'd constructed to survive in a profession that was never designed to welcome me. I kissed him, or he kissed me. The distinction blurred as his hand moved from my shoulder to my face, cradling my jaw with a gentleness that belied the intensity in his eyes. His lips were softer than I'd imagined, and I had imagined them, in the late hours when exhaustion lowered my defenses. He tasted like the green tea he drank instead of coffee, like possibility, like vindication. I pulled away first, breathless and disoriented. This complicates everything. Everything was already complicated, he replied, thumb brushing my cheek with maddening delicacy. This just makes the complications worthwhile. In that moment, standing amid broken ceramic and spilled coffee, I made a decision that had nothing to do with legal strategy or professional advancement. A decision to stop fragmenting myself into acceptable pieces. To bring all of me, the anger, the ambition, the desire, into alignment. We're going to destroy them, I said, the words a promise and a declaration. Junho's smile held the edge I'd come to crave. Yes, we are. The courtroom felt like a battlefield, sterile and unforgiving beneath its veneer of tradition. Judge Harriman's chambers had been decorated in the obligatory legal aesthetic. Dark wood, leather-bound volumes, the conspicuous absence of anything that might suggest humanity or warmth. A temple to precedent rather than progress. Wayland sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by attorneys whose suits cost more than my monthly student loan payment. He didn't look at me directly, a power play I recognized from countless negotiations. A way of communicating that I wasn't worth his personal attention. Victor sat behind them, his presence a reminder of what I'd sacrificed. The security, the trajectory, the promise of eventual partnership if I just played by rules designed to ensure I never won. Junho sat beside me at the defense table, his posture relaxed but alert. He'd insisted on being present despite my concerns about perception, about the optics of having my client so visibly aligned with my defense. Let them see exactly who stands with you, he'd said that morning as we prepared. Let them see that you're not alone. Now, as Judge Harriman entered and the bailiff called the court to order, I felt Junho's presence like a physical force, a counterpressure against the weight of Wayland's institutional advantage. Not a rescuer, a witness, someone who saw my struggle and refused to look away. Wayland's lead counsel approached the podium first, his argument flowing with the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to deference. He presented their patent infringement claim as self-evident, drowning technical details beneath legal jargon designed to obscure rather than clarify. Your Honor, he concluded with manufactured gravity, the defendant's technology clearly and deliberately incorporates the methods described in our client's 2019 patent. The infringement is not only obvious but willful, as evidenced by KST Global's aggressive market strategy targeting the same commercial applications. Judge Harriman nodded, his expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. Ms. Park, your response. I stood, conscious of every eye in the courtroom, of Victor's disapproving frown, of Wayland's deliberate disinterest, of Junho's steady gaze. I'd prepared for this moment obsessively, had rehearsed arguments and counterarguments until they were engraved in my nervous system, had anticipated every possible question, every procedural objection. What emerged instead was something I hadn't scripted. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady despite the thunder of my pulse. I could stand here and bury you in technical specifications that prove KST's quantum encryption method bears no meaningful similarity to Wayland's traditional cryptographic approach. I could cite case law demonstrating the clear differences between incidental functional overlap and actual infringement. I paused, allowing the silence to gather weight. But that's exactly what Mr. Wayland is counting on. He's betting that complexity will obscure the truth, that technical jargon will disguise what is, at its core, an attempt to crush innovation through litigation rather than competition. Wayland's attorney rose. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making unfounded accusations about our client's motives. I'm stating facts supported by evidence. I interrupted, refusing to be derailed. Facts that include Mr. Wayland's pattern of acquiring firms or filing patent suits against every significant quantum computing advancement in the past 5 years. Facts that include his company's deliberate efforts to create conflicts of interest with multiple law firms specializing in technology patents. Judge Harriman leaned forward, interest flickering across his previously impassive features. Ms. Park, these are serious allegations. Yes, Your Honor, they are, and I can provide documentation for each one. I removed a slim file from my briefcase, including evidence that Wayland Technologies retained Bergman Holcomb and Reed specifically to create a conflict of interest with KST Global 3 weeks before filing this lawsuit. The murmur that swept the courtroom was audible despite the judge's warning glance. Victor's face had gone pale. Wayland, for the first time, looked directly at me. His expression a mixture of surprise and calculation that confirmed everything I'd suspected. But more importantly, I continued, refusing to be silenced now that I'd found my rhythm, I can demonstrate in terms this court will readily understand that KST's technology operates on fundamentally different principles than anything described in Wayland's patent. I turned to the evidence display, activated the presentation Junho and I had spent weeks refining. Not the dense technical documentation Wayland expected. A clear, visually compelling comparison that even a judge with minimal technical background could grasp instantly. Wayland's patent describes a method of encrypting data that relies on traditional mathematical algorithms. I explained, the diagrams shifting to illustrate my points. It's like a sophisticated lock and key system, complex, but ultimately breakable with enough computational power. I advanced to the next slide, showing KST's quantum approach. KST's method doesn't use traditional algorithms at all. It relies on the quantum properties of entangled particles, a method that literally could not have been conceived when Wayland filed his patent, because the necessary quantum hardware didn't exist. For the next 20 minutes, I walked Judge Harriman through the fundamental differences, translating complex quantum concepts into accessible analogies without sacrificing accuracy. I could see understanding dawning in his expression. Could see Wayland's attorneys exchanging increasingly concerned glances. In conclusion, Your Honor, I said, returning to the podium. This case isn't about patent infringement. It's about whether our legal system will protect genuine innovation or reward those who use litigation as a weapon against it. It's about whether a company like KST Global should be punished for advancing technology beyond what was possible when Wayland filed his patent. I met Judge Harriman's gaze directly, refusing to temper my conviction. The outcome of this case will signal to every innovator whether breakthrough thinking is worth the legal risk. I respectfully ask the court to dismiss Wayland's claim and allow KST to continue developing technology that genuinely advances the field rather than merely exploiting it. As I returned to my seat, Junho's hand brushed mine beneath the table. A momentary contact that communicated everything words couldn't. Pride. Solidarity. Something deeper I wasn't ready to name. Judge Harriman removed his glasses, cleaned them deliberately, and replaced them with measured precision. I'm going to take this under advisement. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning for my ruling. As the courtroom emptied, Wayland approached our table. A breach of protocol that his attorneys couldn't prevent. He stopped before me, not Junho, his expression unreadable. Impressive performance, Ms. Park, he said, the words carrying no trace of sincerity. You should have come to work for me. I could have made you very wealthy. I met his gaze without flinching. You mistake me for someone who can be bought, Mr. Wayland. Everyone can be bought, he replied, the certainty of privilege in his tone. It's just a question of price. Junho stood, his presence suddenly commanding the space between us. Not everyone measures value the same way, Thomas. Wayland's eyes flicked between us, recognition dawning. I see. Well, when this little romance inevitably ends, Ms. Park, my offer remains open. Talent like yours is wasted on lost causes. He walked away before I could respond, his attorneys trailing in his wake like remeras attached to a shark. Victor lingered, uncertainty in his expression that I'd never seen before. You could still come back, he said quietly. Not to Bergman, but there are other firms. Other paths that don't involve burning every bridge in the industry. The concern in his voice might have been genuine. The awareness that he was losing something valuable. But all I heard was the same fear that had kept me constrained for years. The same cautionary logic that had justified every compromise. Thank you for the advice, I said, gathering my materials with deliberate care. But I've found my path. Junho remained silent as we left the courtroom, respecting my need to process. Only when we reached his car did he speak, his voice carrying the weight of everything we'd risked together. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, you've already won. I looked at him, really looked at the man who had seen my value when I was still struggling to recognize it myself, who had offered opportunity without demanding subservience in return, who had stood beside me rather than in front of me. We've already won, I corrected, reaching for his hand across the console. And tomorrow, everyone else will know it. If the story resonated with you, hit that like button. Comment which part was your favorite and subscribe for more stories about women who choose themselves first and find love along the way. The KST Global launch celebration transformed the company's rooftop into an island of light against the San Francisco night. Glass walls retracted into invisible pockets, erasing the boundary between indoor and outdoor space. The city spread below like a circuit board, patterns of illumination mapping human connection across distance and darkness. 3 months had passed since Judge Harriman's ruling dismissing Wayland's claim. 3 months of rebuilding, of strategic planning, of watching KST's stock price rise as confidence in their technology grew. 3 months of discovering who I could be when fear no longer dictated my choices. Park and Associates now occupied the entire 42nd floor of the building. A team of 17 attorneys and paralegals specializing in technology patent defense. My student loans were paid. My mother had stopped sending job listings from stable firms. My name appeared regularly in legal journals that once would have relegated my contributions to footnotes. I stood alone at a high-top table, watching the celebration unfold around me, watching Junho move through the crowd with effortless grace, his attention fully present for each person he engaged with. The same focused consideration he'd shown me from the beginning. The same respect that had made our professional collaboration evolve into something neither of us had anticipated. We'd been careful, had maintained appropriate boundaries during the case, had waited until after Judge Harriman's ruling before acknowledging the current that had been building between us since that first night. Had given each other space to be certain that what we felt wasn't just adrenaline or proximity or the intensity of shared purpose. Junho approached now, carrying 2 champagne flutes, his eyes finding mine across the crowded rooftop with the same recognition that had changed everything months earlier. He set the glasses on the table and stood across from me, mirroring our first meeting with deliberate symmetry. "If you're free," he said softly, the familiar words carrying new meaning. "Sit here." I smiled, the expression no longer calculated or measured, no longer a professional mask or a social obligation, just the unfiltered joy of being seen completely and valued regardless. "I've never been more free," I replied, reaching for his hand across the table. "And there's nowhere I'd rather sit." His fingers intertwined with mine, warm and certain. Behind us, the board members and investors and technology journalists continued their conversations, oblivious to the private moment unfolding in plain sight, to the completion of a circle that had begun with a terrible blind date and ended with the clearest vision I'd ever had. "What's next?" Junho asked, the question encompassing everything. Our professional collaboration, our personal connection, the future that stretched before us unwritten. I looked out at the city lights, at the darkness between them that no longer seemed threatening, at the distance I'd traveled from the woman who had folded her napkin with precision while calculating billable hours lost. "Everything," I said simply, "everything is next." And for the first time in my life, that prospect filled me with anticipation rather than dread.